Do you find yourself lost somewhere in a city called Neverwinter or Baldur's Gate or even Waterdeep? Or do you find yourself stuck in a place called the High Forest or the Sunset Mountains? You should get yourself a Sword Coast Adventures Guide. But before I start talking about this book, I want to give a quick shout out to Aaron from The Forge. He has a great little YouTube channel about creating maps, creating art, creating 3D terrain for your Dungeons & Dragons game. I accidentally stumbled upon his channel. I got to talk with him. He's a very great guy, by the way. So go over to the description below, click his channel and subscribe to his channel. By the way, don't tell anybody, but I think he has dwarven blood in him. I'm just saying. So, the Sword Coast Adventures Guide is probably the one book I shouldn't have bought. That's not because it is a bad book, because in any way, shape or form, it is not a bad book at all. It is just not the right book for me, because it is the Sword Coast Adventures Guide and I play in a homebrew. Although there are a lot of great player options in this book, for a homebrew campaign it's just not worth the 30 euros. So now let's get down to business. Say you are playing in the Forgotten Realms, you are playing in Faerun on the Sword Coast. Do you actually need this book? Well, probably you won't need it, but it gives some pretty cool extra playable options for your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. The problem I have with this book is that it is a very thin book. It only counts 160 pages if I'm correct, and 120, 118 pages from those 160 pages are all about the lore of the Forgotten Realms and especially the Sword Coast, which is for some people pretty awesome, but for me, I don't use it, first of all. So the lore in this book is very decent as well, very well written, and it really draws you into the Sword Coast very well. There are parts on almost every major city, every major forest. There are parts on the common races you find in the Forgotten Realms, which are also in the player's handbook, but they just tend to go a little bit deeper into the details, which is very great. There are a lot of great places where you can find adventure. Also, they go into a lot of details about the gods in the Forgotten Realms, because they are a very big part of Dungeons & Dragons, and especially Faerun. You can find some very cool descriptions of almost all the gods you know and love, and some of them you hate probably. So that's very cool to read about, especially if you are playing a cleric or a paladin from a certain deity. This is very cool stuff. Then almost every major city in the Sword Coast gets a small little map with a few pages about the city. Some NPCs, some important stuff you need to know about the city. How the city came to be, the major history of the city, some cool NPCs, some cool places in and around the city. So also cool stuff. Who doesn't like Neverwinter? Everybody who plays Dungeons & Dragons likes Neverwinter. And don't tell me you don't. Also, there are 6 pages, yes, 6 pages dedicated to the dwarves of the Sword Coast. They go into detail where they live, how they live, why they live there, and how long they've been living there. And of course, all the dwarven clans of the Sword Coast are explained in this little tiny book. Something they also do very well is when they are talking about a certain place in the world, they tend to put a small little drawing in the corner zooming in on that part so you really know where you're headed. If you are a dungeon master looking for a real grabbable hook to start an adventure in the Sword Coast, you might not really find that here, because the lore in this book, although very well written and with some great artwork, it is all major lore about the world and there is not really a adventure hook in here. Enough about the 120 pages full of lore about the Sword Coast. Let's go to the real juicy part of Dungeons & Dragons, and it is player options. Although, like always, there are some minor things that I do not really like. I'm just gonna go over some of the cool stuff in here. The cool thing is that every class in the player's handbook gets at least one new option to play, and every race in the player's handbook gets also at least one option to play. I think the dwarves even get 2 options, the shield dwarves and the gold dwarves, which is pretty awesome. There's only one thing I don't really like about it, and that is that more than half of these playable options use stats from options already in the player's handbook. For example, the shield dwarves just use the mountain or hill dwarf stats, and they get like this tiny little text describing them to be different. That said, there are also a few very cool player options. For example, the cleric has a Arcana domain with some new spells to cast for the cleric, with some new stuff to do for a cleric, which is pretty awesome. Then there is the Purple Dragon Knight, a fighter martial arts type, which I find very cool, and I am going to test this one out. It seems a little underpowered on paper, but almost everything the fighter does seems underpowered on paper, so I'm going to try this one out for sure. I'm probably going to use this one in my homebrew campaign, so he will not be named Purple Dragon Knight. He will probably be a knight of something else, but still I find it very interesting. Maybe he's just a little underpowered, but I don't really care about underpowered, because underpowered is always cool and gives you a lot of chances to roleplay the living crap out of your character. By the way, I already found a very cool combo with this guy. For example, if you build a dwarf that is a Purple Dragon Knight, which has dwarven toughness, so he can heal himself by dodging, and then use your second wind as a bonus action. You heal yourself for about 24 HP while giving all your allies temporary hit points. That's pretty cool. All in one turn without using your action surge, by the way. Then there is the Paladin option. Paladin, my second favorite class ever, because the first class I ever played 17 years ago was a Paladin named Aladdin. That's no joke. I was 14 years old and I didn't know what Dungeons and Dragons was, so I named my Paladin Aladdin, the Paladin. But the Paladin option, Oath of the Crown, is a very cool oath to swear. Basically, you just swear an oath to some kind of law or crown or king or whatever. The Oath of the Crown has a very cool feature called Turn the Tide, where you can heal your allies within 30 feet of you for 1d6 plus your charisma modifier. Very cool option. I have also yet to test out the Battle Rager, a barbarian path. Basically, you are a dwarf, which is a requirement, by the way, and you wear spiked armor, which does extra damage when you attack or get attacked or something like that. Although there are some other really cool things in this book, there are also some very cool spells in this book. For example, the cantrip Green Flame Blade, which is totally overused by one guy in my party. He is not ever attacking one of my monsters without saying, "I use Green Flame Blade." Look into this spell list, it is very cool. It has some very cool artwork, by the way. It's all worth it. And of course, some very cool backgrounds, like for example the City Watch. I'm not going into detail on these things because I want you to read them yourself if you buy this book. So yes, if you are into a book that has 80% lore about cities, about mountains, forests, villages, gods, races in the realm, you are buying a very good book. But please consider that only about maybe 20, maybe a little more, 30% of this book has player options, and only half of that really changes the numbers of the game. Of course, we are all role players, and some very cool role-playing options are always welcome. There are also a lot of great tables, random rolling tables in this thing for characters' flaws, character bonds, character personality traits. Maybe you are better off at looking, for example, the Xenatter's Guide to Everything, which has a lot of number crunching new stuff. This thing is almost purely flavor for the Sword Coast. But if you are playing in a homebrew campaign, I would not advise you to get this one. Yes, there are some cool things you can get out of it, but it's just not worth 30 euros in my opinion. If you are playing in a homebrew, if you're playing in the Sword Coast, it is worth 30 euros. That was it for today. If you like my channel, please consider subscribing and consider liking this video and commenting on the video with what book you want me to review. There is a review of Xenatter's Guide to Everything coming, but I first want some playtime with it before I really review it, because it is such an important add-on to the game. In the meanwhile, you can check one of these videos right here to see if there is anything of your interest that I am already reviewing. Anyway, I hope your inspiration may guide you.